When talking about color spaces in Gamut, it's important to remember that color is three-dimensional, and we can best see this in LAB. Some people will call it lab. The L in lab stands for lightness, and in a three-dimensional space, it's plotted where black is 0 and white is 100, and then colors expressed on two axes of A and B. So a black and white image would just be straight up and down this line. A color image will be plotted in various forms, so that a dark saturated color will be further out on this axis down in this area, and a lighter, more pastel color would be on the appropriate axis higher up. Let's take a look at a couple of color spaces. This is sRGB. So let's just look at it visually and to see how sRGB looks three-dimensionally. But a lot of people have heard you really shouldn't use sRGB. You should use a larger color space. But that said, sRGB is the color space of the web. And in many cases, for social media and anything that's going to be displayed, the sRGB color space is probably the best one to use. But for printing, you want to use a wider color space. And many people are familiar with Adobe RGB 1998. And it's a larger color space, but it's not that much larger in certain colors than sRGB. And let's take a look at sRGB inside of Adobe RGB. And you can see that, well, gee, it seems as though the blues are similar down in this area and these kind of magentas and reds. But remember, color is three-dimensional, so we want to look at it in different directions. And you can see, aha, there are some significant differences. All very interesting, but how does that relate to an actual image? So this is an image that I captured at a Day of the Dead event, and let's see how that plots in LAB three-dimensionally. Now, as I move around, you can see that the very saturated colors in these areas here are further out on the axis, and the darker colors are lower, and the lighter colors, which move into oranges and yellows, move further up. Same thing with the blues. There are more pastel blues that are closer to that L line or lightness line, and the more saturated blues, like back here and certainly in these shadowy areas, are further out on this axis and further down in this area. So this particular image plots three-dimensionally like this. What does that mean in relationship to color spaces? So this is sRGB in relationship to the image on the left. And it's pretty clear to see that many colors in these reds, certainly in blues when we look around in three dimensions, are outside of the gamut of sRGB. So if you were to have captured this image in RAW and brought it into the sRGB color space, or in your camera did not capture in RAW and captured in sRGB, these colors would not be captured. They would be essentially clipped. So this is why a lot of people go, of course, that's why I always shoot in RAW and I bring things into Adobe RGB 1998. And here is Adobe RGB 1998, but look at the colors that are outside of the gamut of Adobe RGB. These are colors, depending on the ink and the printer you're using and the paper that you're using, that can be printed in some cases. And this is why we encourage people to use a wider color space than Adobe RGB 1998, because if you start in Adobe RGB 1998, you may be clipping colors that you can actually print. So the recommendation is to shoot in RAW and open all images into ProPhoto RGB. This is a very large space. And if we take a look inside, we can see that virtually all the colors in this original image are contained within ProPhoto RGB. None of these colors are clipped. Now, there are many colors in ProPhoto RGB that simply cannot be printed, but it's always best to start in ProPhoto RGB so you're not clipping any colors, edit your image as you see fit, and then for the remaining colors that may be out of gamut, that's where you set the correct rendering intent.